Hello and welcome to another episode in the Godot Basics Tutorial Series. In this episode, we will be taking a look at part 2 in saving and loading files in Godot. Let's go ahead and take a look at what we will be trying to save. So in here we just have a basic screen with 10 circles present. They all have the same radius, color, and different positions. We also have a button towards the bottom center of our screen. Every time you press it, our buttons change. However, we have an issue. Every time we decide to close it, notice how our positions are not saved. So in this episode, what we're going to take a look at is how exactly do we save these circles so every time we start the game, they are present in the same positions that they were in when we previously closed them. Before we get into that, let's take a look at what we need to save at minimum. So first, we need to save our positions, the positions of each circle. We need to save the script file path for each circle. We would like to save the names that each newly created circle instance object has. We would also like to save the group that the circles belong to. And we would also like to save the color and the size. Notice how the color and size are grayed out. Even though we would like to save them now, we are not going to implement a feature that takes advantage of the saved data. However, we would like to save it because perhaps in the future we may want to add features that modify our circle's color and size. And in this case, size would be its radius. Now, when we run our game right now, as it currently is, and we head over to the Scene tab, and we click the remote option, notice how we have our root viewport, followed by our two nodes that are inside our scene, CircleManager and button. And notice how we have 10 circle instanced objects. Now, these are instance objects that are created during runtime, because if you check our local option, notice how we only have 2 nodes on the scene. During editing, we have the CircleManager, which is a node 2D, and a button, which happens to be a button. However, when our game is running, we are creating 10 circles that we display to the scene. And it is inside one of our scripts, primarily our CircleManager script. When we want to change the position, we're going to change its position through the CircleManager script, and each individual circle is created from a circle script. And so we will be dealing with 2 different scripts. Again, one script handles the position, radius, and color of the circle, and the other script, the CircleManager script, handles changing each individual position. And we would also like our CircleManager to handle the saving and loading of our circle values. So every time we quit the game and we start the game again, we can have our circles start at its last saved position. Let's go ahead and take a look at that. So here we have the circle script. We extend from node 2D because node 2D inherits from canvas item, and we need canvas item in order to draw our circle and have access to the draw virtual method. We gave our circle script the class name circle, so we don't have to load it through its file path. We can just call circle.new in the CircleManager class. We have 3 variables. The first variable is circle color, the second variable is circle radius, and the third variable is circle position. These are our 3 class properties. As you can see here, keep in mind that our 2 properties, circle color and circle radius, have values initialized to them, and that's because we're not going to pass any values down from our CircleManager. And so we would like to give it default values so our circles are consistent when they are created. However, circle position doesn't have a default value set, and that's because we are going to pass its value down from the parent node. And so every time we create a circle, we are going to pass down, or rather initialize it with a vector2 value that represents its position in an X and Y coordinate system. Now, to do that, we need to declare an initialize virtual method, and that's what we have right here. And it takes in a vector2 data type as the first argument, returns a void value, which means we don't have to return anything. And notice how we assign the passed in value position into our circle position property. And that is how we determine where we're going to position each individual circle. And of course, to draw our circle onto the screen, we need to use the draw circle method provided to us by Canvas item. It takes in 3 arguments. The first is a positional value that is a vector2 data type. The next represents a radius, which takes in a float. And the last argument represents a color, which takes in a color data type. And lastly, we would like a function that our parent node can call upon in order to change the current position value for each individual circle, and we have the update position method for that. It takes in a vector2 value representing the position in the x and y axis, and we just reassign that new passed in data into our circle position property, and we call the update method, which just basically forces our script to call the draw method, updating the scene. Now in the CircleManager, this is where the magic happens. This is where we create our circles and where we're going to add functionality to save and load our circles. And again, it's similar to last episode. In this case, we have a variable called button node. And the reason we want that is because we would like to connect to it. And as you can see here, that is exactly what we're doing. We are connecting our button node to our update circle positions method. We also have a variable that's going to handle our random number generator. I'm going to introduce the concept of object pooling in this episode, and we're going to use a variable for that. Again, object pooling is just an array that stores in values. In this case, we're going to store in our circle objects. And lastly, we have a constant value called total circles, and that just determines how many circles we're going to create when we start the game. In our ready virtual method, we're going to randomize our random floats random number generator. Again, we're going to connect the button's pressed state to our update circle positions method. And right here, you can see the magic happening for the creation of our circle objects. And so we're using a simple for loop, and we're going to do several things. The first is we're going to call the create random circle node method, and we're going to assign its return value into a variable x. And once that variable x represents the circle class, now I'm going to go ahead and type that real quick so we can see what's going on. Now, after we have our circle instance object, we are going to give our instance object a name. And in this case, it's just going to be circle appended by an integer value representing the iteration in the for loop. After, we're going to push our circle object into the array. In this case, our array is called circle pool. And lastly, we're going to add our newly instanced circle object onto the scene. Now let's go ahead and take a look at the create random circle node. If you take a look at our create random circle node function, what we're doing is we're creating a variable node2d because our circle script happens to be node2d data type. In the next line, what we're doing is we're creating a new circle instance object. And because it takes in one argument, we're passing in a method which returns back a vector2 data type. And if we quickly look at that here, it's just a simple randomize method that takes in a variable width, which uses the randf range, and it takes in a variable height, which takes in the randf range. And this just randomizes where we're going to position our circle node and return it back in the vector2 format. And so when we come back here, because we're passing in a vector2 data type into the new method, what we're saying is create the circle and pass in a single vector2 argument, which is what our circle needs in order to instantiate. And lastly, when our circle node has successfully instantiated, we're going to return it back. And of course, when we return it back, it gets stored in our temporary variable x, and then it goes through the process of creating a name, pushing it into the circle pool array, and adding that circle object onto the scene. Every time we click the button, we're going to call this method here called update circle positions. And all we do is we loop our array, and we say that for every circle object in our array, we're going to call its update position method, and we're going to pass it in a new vector2 data type. And this is where we get our randomized circles. So if you take a look here, every time we press change position, notice how our circles change. Now the issue here is that we are not saving. So I went ahead and created two functions called SaveCircles and LoadCircles. Now let's go ahead and take a look at saving and loading circles. Now let's go ahead and create our function that saves our circles every time we close the game window. And remember, we have 4 steps when we want to save or load from a file. First, we need to create that file and or open that file. Then we need to create some type of stream, whether it's input or output or both. Then we need to manipulate our data by either reading from the file and or writing to the file. And then lastly, we need to close our file. And so let's go ahead and do that. We're going to create our file variable. So let's go ahead and do that. We're going to create our file variable. Now, once we've created our file variable, what we're going to do is we're going to open it and create some type of stream. And in this case, we would like to save or write to the file. Now, once we've created our file and we've opened up our file and or created it, let's go ahead and actually save data into our file. To do that, we're just going to use a simple for loop, and we're going to loop over our object pool variable, which again is just an array. And from here, we're going to create our dictionary. And the first value we're going to save is the position. And here we're going to use the variable to string method, and that is because our vector2 is in fact a special data type that can't just be saved, and so we need to convert its variable data type into string format. And to do that again, we're going to use the var to string method. And from here we have the circle position, which in fact is our stored vector2 data type inside our circle object. Next, we're going to save the color. And again, we're going to use the variable to string method because color is a special data type. And from there, we can save the name next. By the way, this is also the same as the following. After that, let's go ahead and save the radius. And lastly, we need to save the script. The most important thing is the script because that's what we're going to need when we want to create newly instantiated game objects. And as you can see here, in order to get the file path of our script, we need to use the getScript method followed by the getPath method that's provided to us by our circle instantiated object, which again, we are iterating through with the variable x. Once we've created our variable dictionary, let's go ahead and actually save that into our file. And once we've created that into our file, we're going to iterate till we exit the for loop, and from there we can close our file. And that's basically it. Keep in mind that our SaveCircles method doesn't actually do anything. We do need to, in fact, call the SaveCircles method in order to save it to the circlesfile.txt file. And since we didn't go over notifications, I'm not going to do that in this episode. I will copy and paste it, but it's basically the same as the last episode. When we receive notifications, we call the notification virtual method. We take in an argument. We have to check that that argument is equivalent to the notification value that we are seeking. In this case, we would like the value that represents when the user has exited the game screen, and that would be the notification WM quit request provided to us by the main loop. And from there, we're going to go ahead and save our circles, or rather call our SaveCircles method, followed by quitting the actual game screen. And when we press play, and we change our positions magnificently, notice how when we play again, it doesn't save the positions because we haven't created a load file method. However, let's go ahead and quickly check if in fact we are saving positions. Now, we do in fact save our file. As you can see here, we're saving color, we're saving the name. Most importantly, we are saving the position, and notice here how we have vector2 followed by our x and y positional values. We are saving radius, and most importantly, we are saving the script path file in string format. Now let me go ahead and close this, and we're going to go ahead and create the load method. Now when we load scripts, it's going to be in the similar format of saving, in that we need to open a file, we need to figure out the stream, followed by manipulation of data, and then we need to close it, or excuse me, close the file. So let's go ahead and do that. Now next, this is very important. We need to make sure that our file does in fact exist, because if it doesn't exist, we need to exit out of our method, or else when we try to open a file that does not exist, we will be thrown an error. Now over here, you can see that we're passing in a string value representing the path file, which is called circlesfile.txt, and if it in fact does not exist with the not keyword, we're going to exit out of our LoadCircles method. Now everything else will be the same, or rather similar. We're going to actually open the file, and then we're going to iterate the file, grabbing the necessary information, and then we're going to exit the LoadCircles method after we close our opened file. Let's go ahead and do that. Next, we're going to iterate, and so let's make sure that we use the while loop because we do not know how long our file is. What we're making sure is if our get position, or rather our current position, is less than the total amount of lines, or characters that our file has, we're going to continue to iterate. Next, we're going to iterate our file line by line and passing that line and converting it from JSON format into something usable, basically a dictionary. And from there, we are now able to create our circles. And that's basically it. We went ahead and we created our LoadCircles. Now we need to make sure that we do in fact call it when we start the game. So I'm going to go ahead, copy our function. I'm going to go ahead and add it into our ready virtual method. And I'm going to do some cleanup. I'm basically going to get rid of our for loop, add that into a function, and add it here in the not open file statement check. Because if our file does not in fact exist, we would like to go ahead and call it. But for simplicity, I'm just going to go ahead and I'm just going to leave this code here, but I'm going to clean it up before I upload this to GitHub for you to see and play around with. Now, if we play, I got an error, cannot convert string to vec. Oh, I know why. Okay, it's right here. So string to var, which was the second method I was showing you in the slideshow. But now that we fixed that and we press play, notice how we have 1, 2, 3, 4 towards the top right corner of our game screen. And if we exit and we press play again, notice how they are in fact staying in the same positions that they were in when we exited. And if we change position, notice how there's only one at the top right. And if we go ahead and press play, notice how it's still at the top right. And so now we know that our saving and loading of values works in our script. Now let's go ahead and see what I did in the while loop so we are all on the same page. Now again, when we enter the LoadCircles from the ready function, we're going to open up a new file. And if that file doesn't exist, we're going to go ahead and we're going to create our own circles. However, if a file does in fact exist, we're not going to create our own circles from scratch anymore. What we're going to do is we're going to read from the file, and then in good faith, and I say good faith because we're assuming that our file is not empty, we're going to go ahead and run the while loop. We're going to convert our JSON file, or the JSON format that was saved, and we're going to parse it into something readable that we can pass into our dictionary variable called data. And notice how we're just opening our file, we're reading line by line, we're parsing the JSON into a format that we can take into our variable data, which in fact is a dictionary data type. And now our data can be used like you would a dictionary data type. We create our variable called CircleLoad, and it is a reference. It's a reference because what we're going to do is we're going to load our script, which again is a file path, to our circle script. And so our circle load acts to the prelude of a class instantiation, because with the circle load as a reference to the script, we can use the new method, and it takes in one argument, which is a vector2 data type. Now, it threw the error because I just gave it the value in the dictionary called position. And keep in mind that the position value, although it has the correct format, vector2 followed by the X and Y position values, it was in a string format. Remember, we converted from variable to string, and now we need to convert from string to variable. And so with the string to variable method, we go ahead, we call that, and we run this line successfully, no errors thrown. And then next, we would like to give back our circle objects the name that was saved. And so we go ahead and do that with the setName method, followed by the dictionary key name, which has the value of the actual name in the file. We call the add child because we would like to add the child onto the script. And our instantiated object is circle object. variable, so keep that in mind. And then after, we want the circle pool array to contain our circle objects, and so we use the push back method and we pass it in our circle object, and when we're done iterating, we close our file. And that's basically it. I'm going to upload this onto GitHub, not this exact file. I'm going to do some modification because, for example, there's going to be an error thrown in this while loop if the link. Now I'm going to upload this file to GitHub. I'm going to modify it a little bit because I notice here in the while loop, we do in fact will throw an error because when we try to create our circles, we are under the assumption that even though the file exists, it still contains something. And so in that case, I'm just going to make sure to check that we are not opening an empty file. So look for that in the uploaded GitHub project. I'm going to do that off screen. Thank you for clicking the like button and thank you for clicking the subscribe button. If you have any questions or comments, please feel free to leave them in the comments section down below. I look forward to seeing you in the next episode. Have an amazing day.